Welcome to Make It Real, a series dedicated to taking a close look at critical, complex issues facing our society. My name is Justin Paras, and I am your host. Today, Make It Real will give a glimpse into the complexities of climate change and some possible solutions.
I'm your co-host, Jyotika RoyC. Climate change is a very broad issue, very much associated with human behavior. What we buy, what we eat, how we live and drive, and even what we wear all affect the climate. To start off our discussion, let's consider the fashion industry and make a video visit to the workshop of a fashion designer who designs clothing and accessories with an eye towards sustainability in general and the climate in particular. Here we go.
When I started the brand back in 2011, and I would use the word sustainability, I even had some pushback from friends that said, I don't know if that's really an important thing that you need to bring into your marketing. And I'm like, well, it's not about the marketing aspect of it, it's really about the education aspect. My name is Elizabeth Welborn, and my company is Stick and Ball. We're a sustainable luxury fashion brand. I started the brand out of inspiration of the equestrian culture, in particular in North and South America, when I started to get involved in polo. During college, I had the opportunity to study in Guatemala. And when I was there, that's when I really started to learn about hand-woven textiles. This is our first product that I designed. It's called our knit collar reversible alpaca poncho. And I chose alpaca because when I was researching fibers, I wanted something that was soft, something that really could last a long time. I was really excited to learn that they're also very sustainable in terms of grazers. They don't pull root systems out from the ground, and so they'll eat, the grass on the top of the root system. And it's a regenerative fiber, and so it's going to grow back. And so that in particular was what drew me to start using alpaca in our outerwear. I use it now in all of our outerwear as well as our home decor too. Again, the importance of companies and talking about sustainability, hopefully what it does is it spurs consumers to really do a lot of their own research. I think consumers need to go on into their own journey of learn a little bit about textiles, purchasing fibers that are going to last. Linens, hemps, alpaca, climate beneficial wool, vegetable tanned leather. Those are, I would say, the most important textiles that we use. What I really look for is regenerative fibers. And then I also look for fibers or textiles that are part of the food chain as well. Aside from alpaca and leather, there are a lot of plant-based fibers that are incredibly sustainable. And one is hemp. I'm really excited. We finally got some of our 100% pure hemp canvas. Hemp acts as a carbon sink. When it's planted, it really sequesters a lot of carbon. It also pulls a lot of impurities from the soil. So it helps to clean soils as well, and that's just a fabulous aspect of hemp. And it's also very durable. Since the inception of the brand, we've actually handmade all of our leather goods here in California. This is leather that comes from end-of-life dairy cattle. All of the leather is tanned with vegetable dyes that help to preserve the leather, so we're not using any toxic chemicals that are or heavy metals in the leather tanning. It's more expensive to produce with vegetable tanned leather than it is with the chromium tanned leather, but it's a cleaner leather. We tell all of our clients if there's ever anything wrong with your bag to go ahead and send it back to us. Circularity is something that I think is really important for us as a brand, but also for us to move into more sustainable consumption and production, being able to make sure that we think about not only the beginning of the life of the product, but also the end of life of the product. I think it's still tough. I think from the investment community, they're still expecting companies to, maintain the same rate of profitability. But I think there's going to have to be a moment where we start to say, it's not just, your bottom line and your profit of what you're producing over these next few years, but what is the long-term cost of what you're doing to the environment too? And I think that needs to be taken into account as well.
To continue the discussion, we are delighted that Elizabeth Goodwin Welborn is here tonight, along with other esteemed guests. Pat Burt, former mayor of Palo Alto, Jasneet Sharma, the director of the Office of Sustainability for County of Santa Clara, and Allison Brooks, the executive director of the Bay Area Regional Collaborative, referred to as BARC.
Welcome to each of you. We'll get back to Elizabeth to expand on the issues in the fashion industry. But before we do that, let's get an update about the science of climate change and the factors that are driving it from Mayor Burt.
Thanks. Well, it's nice to be here. I'll say that the science of climate change is changing so rapidly that the scientists are continuing to work hard to keep up with it. On a bad news side, basically, the climate of the Earth is warming faster yet than was recently projected. I attended the 2015 Paris Climate Accords, and at that time, the goal was to take the actions that would cap the rise in global climate temperature rise by about 1.5 degrees C, although it was recognized at the time that we were probably going to get to 2 degrees C. We now are probably already blowing past that 1.5 degrees C, and it's likely that we won't even be able to prevent exceeding 2 degrees C. Stephen Chu, who is Nobel laureate and Secretary of Energy under President Obama, has been really campaigning that we already, unless we change significantly for more aggressive policies, we're going to see 3 degrees C or more rise in global temperature averages, which is phenomenal. The good news is that there are rapidly evolving technologies that enable us to make the transformation in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions significantly at a far lower cost than we thought just a few years ago. So when we look at how this affects us, it's the greenhouse gas emissions that we have are everywhere in everything we do, from the clothes we wear, to the food that we eat and the sources of that, to the materials we use. But as cities that represent about 75% of the global greenhouse gas emissions going forward, we've looked at how do we really address the emissions that are related to our city activities, everybody who lives and works in our cities, and the city government itself. At the backbone of that, we've recognized that what we need to do is move toward energy systems that are renewable and non-greenhouse gas generating. So in Palo Alto, we own our own utilities. And we started having significant renewable portfolio to our electricity going back in the early 2000s. We were ahead of the state of California. The state of California is ahead of the rest of the country and is a real global leader in these efforts. And we began to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in our electricity to the point that by 2016, we became what's called carbon neutral over the course of the year. That means that we produce, through the contracts that we have, more renewable and carbon-free electricity than we consume over the course of the year. That becomes the backbone for the rest of our actions, which is how do we reduce the emissions related to our transportation and our buildings. And that's the myriad of steps that we have now. What we have learned is that getting to that carbon neutrality on electricity is a major milestone, but in a lot of ways it's a lot less complex than dealing with the remainder. So that's what we're all learning about right now and implementing it very rapidly through a whole series of programs. And we have to look at if we look at transportation, how do we do this in an equitable way? Same thing in our buildings. And we're doing that. But we're discovering and developing programs and sharing them on a collaborative basis with other leading cities and agencies that are all inventing the wheel as we're going along on this path. So we adopted a goal in 2016 that we would reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030. And we're on a good path to that, but getting the remainder, we've already done about 60+% of that goal. But the remainder is a lot more complicated. In our homes, we have, as a society in the US, we've moved to much of the country to using what we call natural gas, methane. And getting methane out of our homes is the key element to transforming our buildings to being carbon free. It's also, though, the same measures that we use for that provide us with healthier environments and higher quality of living. So it's not all painful. What we've underappreciated is how bad some of these other uses have been. Cooking with methane out of our gas stoves increases the likelihood of childhood asthma by 40%. And when parents hear that, the common reaction is anger. Anger that they were never told that, and that they would have made these changes sooner if they had known it. As we switch to heat pumps in not only our water heaters, but heating our homes, we go to a steady state flow of warm air instead of the blast that we get from a furnace. And the same device that we use to heat our homes with what's called now a heat pump, which is 3 times more efficient than traditional heating methods, that same technology is actually, in the summer, an air conditioner. Well, we're seeing we didn't need a lot of air conditioning in our climate, but not only are we getting warmer now, but we're seeing that people are more and more installing air conditioning because we already have a massive climate impact in our communities, which is the mega fires that we've been experiencing almost every summer. And they occur during the peak heat, and people close their windows and are trying to protect themselves from the smoke. Yes. And as a result, they're needing air conditioning in a way that they didn't used to. Used to open up the windows when it was a hot day in the summer. So we're already contending with severe impacts of climate change today. I'll note that on these the mega fires, we've grossly underappreciated how severe they already are. In 2020, we had about 20 people in the state of California die directly from those massive fires. But researchers at UCLA and Stanford have seen that the number of people who actually died because they have compromised health conditions from that was closer to 2,000, 2 orders of magnitude. And that's from the single year of that fire. That's not from year after year of breathing that smoke. So we're seeing those impacts right now, and as a result, all of us have to move more aggressively. But the good news is we can do this efficiently. I mentioned that we're carbon neutral in our electricity in Palo Alto. We did that, and our residential electricity rates are 50% below PG&E.
Wow.
So we're cleaner electricity at half the cost of PG&E.
Wow.
So doing it smartly and with the latest technologies, which mean that solar and wind and batteries are getting cheaper and more efficient every year. That's our future. So we can really make these changes and do so in a way that will give healthier lives. We won't be breathing automobile exhaust from internal combustion engines. We will have healthier buildings and homes. We'll have greater comfort. But it's a big transition. And there's a lot of parts to it. And we're all learning on the job right now. And that's where we are sharing what we're learning from city to city, and from the larger agencies to the smaller ones. From the smaller agencies, like cities, we're test beds and are being able to prove out things that can be scaled at a higher level.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mayor Burt.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your insights with us, Mayor Burt.
You bet.
With that overview, let's now get back to the fashion industry and hear from Elizabeth Goodwin Welborn.
Thank you, Justin and Jyoti, for having me. I'm happy to be here with you all. Yeah, many may wonder what fashion has to do with climate change, but fashion is one of the leading contributors to both pollution as well as carbon emissions as an industry. I think it's arguably between the second and third biggest polluter in the world. From everywhere from, how we're sourcing the materials that we're using to make our clothing and accessories, to the actual manufacturing as well. And then, of course, the disposal of these goods is also leading to many problems. Whether it's, pollution and the fact that we're having to recycle as well, in very inefficient ways. So fashion very much has a lot to do with climate change, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Fortunately, I feel like in the last few years, the dialogue is not just an every now and then occurrence. It's something that is, I think, across the board in our industry. I hear, there's topics being brought up in magazines such as Vogue, for example, Business of Fashion, and all of these other industry magazines. And it's something that we're all really trying to address. Unfortunately, I think if we go back to the material sourcing, which is, of course, a big contributor, petrochemical fibers really has led to fast fashion, and clothing got very inexpensive. And as a result of that, as consumers, in the last couple of decades, the average consumer has increased their consumption of fashion by 60%. And then the discarding of those goods has also dramatically increased too. So the material sourcing is something that a lot of people are paying attention to. And just as Pat said, there's also great things that I think we're starting to see in the industry. So there's the ability right now, or there's a lot of innovative fibers that are being produced right now. Really amazing fibers that feel like cotton that come from kelp. There's one wonderful vegan leather that's out there right now by a company called Natural Fiber Welding, that has no petrochemicals, and it's all recyclable and comes from minerals as well. So there's some exciting and innovative things that are coming into the business. But because the model in the last few decades has been based on, everybody's profitability model has been based on these very inexpensive materials, it's unfortunately going to take a little bit longer than what we would like to see, I think, in the industry to make those changes. From the manufacturing standpoint, just as you were talking about, I think there's definitely room for improvement in terms of using cleaner energy in our production. As a brand at Stick and Ball, we not only have a high bar for what manufacturers we use to produce our goods, but we also incorporate a lot of handwork and artisan work into our products. So that's a really important part too. And then, if you look at from the beginning to the end of the product, it's choosing these materials that at the end of the life of the garment, well, first of all, you want it to last. So that's a really important part. So you try to pick materials that are going to last instead of something that's going to then, has to be discarded. But also something that then can be easily recycled if needed, or once it is, retired, that it's not going to have a negative or toxic effect, in our soils. So those are some really big key considerations. One thing that really can help, I think, is that consumers just become more educated. If consumers become more discerning, it's going to put pressure on the industry. So just as I think consumers began to read labels for food, the same thing I think is really important for them to really understand what's in their clothing. We all have heard more and more about microplastic pollution. Fashion contributes over 30% of the microplastics in the ocean. There's so many different statistics now about microplastics, but, and I may get this wrong, but I think it's 2 in 5 or 3 in 5 men will be sterile by 2050. Has anybody else heard that statistic? Mm-hmm. It's pretty astounding, and that's coming from the the hormone problems that are happening from the microplastics that are within our environment. So, choosing things that are not plastic based. We also, I think we were talking about this earlier this evening, I think it's 9% of the plastics that are used are able to be recycled. The rest of it is either ending up in our oceans or disproportionately on the shores or in the, in dumps of third world countries. So from the consumer being discerning to also, I think, as the industry, we need to be held responsible as well in our material choices. That's some very important key considerations.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Elizabeth, and sharing your insights on the fashion industry and the impact on the climate.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And here to give us a perspective of Santa Clara County is Jasneet Sharma, the Director of the Office of Sustainability for the County of Santa Clara. Director Sharma, what can we do to help lessen the effects of climate change?
Great, thank you. And again, thank you, Jyotika, for the invite, and I'm happy to be here today. I maybe wanted to pick up a few of the threads that Mayor Burt had started, and in order for us to get to what we can do, I also wanted to speak a little bit to some of the real life consequences that we're seeing, the populations that are being burdened, and then speak a little bit to what strategies and approaches we might be able to take both as organizations, but also as individuals as well. So maybe add to what Mayor Burt was saying is, with all these climate events that we're seeing, I think things that were not common in our vocabulary are very common now. Atmospheric rivers, Pineapple Express, like these were terms, 1,000-year storm in San Diego. Like these were things we'd never heard of before, but it's just a very common part of our vocabulary now. We're seeing these really hot days and the number and the frequency, but I think what many people don't realize is we're seeing a bigger number of warm nights. They're a bigger problem than hot days, because cooler nights is when our body gets to cool down, and that's not happening anymore. So the stresses we feel from a heat event continue on, for multiple days. So just having an understanding of, we're seeing these boom and busts. We're suddenly going to see multiple days of rainfall or multiple events, but then we've just gone through a whole cycle of drought for many years in California. So every event, the weather patterns are becoming more and more extreme. And I think we just need to understand that it's here. It's now, it's the moment that we're in, and how do we kind of rise up to that occasion as well. So I think if there's a way that we can help people understand that even though you may not be directly impacted, in the moment you are being, for example, a road might be flooded that you often take to work. Elizabeth, you were sharing that example earlier. A lot of what many people don't realize, and Mayor Burt, you know this, our wastewater treatment plants are often situated on the bay shore, kind of, we make use of gravity. So as some of that sea level is rising, that wastewater treatment plant is going to get flooded. And how is that going to impact me who lives up on the hill? My flush is not going to work anymore, right? Things are going to back up. So I think getting people to understand that we may not be impacted directly, but these cascading indirect impacts are just as important for us to recognize and for us to be a part of the solution as well. The other thing is really understanding who's going to be impacted the most. We often say climate change is a stress multiplier. So all the inequities that we're seeing with housing affordability, lack of access to food or food insecurity, the burdens we see that people have with disparate health outcomes, or we're even seeing in income and education outcomes, all of those are going to get worsened because of climate change as well. The population group, just like we saw in COVID, that's most likely to be impacted, is the one that's going to face the risk from climate impacts as well. And those are usually, our children, our seniors, low-income populations, people of color. So those are the groups that are going to be impacted the most, but also the environment in which they live is going to impact them as well. I'll share like one example to further elaborate on this is in Santa Clara County, low-income neighborhoods have about half the tree canopy or tree cover of high-income neighborhoods. We've seen this through research. Now we know trees are very important. They cool the environment, they provide shade, they create these little microclimates, they even lower the surface temperature. So now a low-income neighborhood is actually seeing higher temperature. They are also the population group that has worse health outcomes. They usually have chronic illnesses, they have maybe asthma or diabetes. On top of that, they're often the households that don't have air conditioning. And if they do, they're not able to run it because it's going to increase their energy and their utility bill. So you can see this multiplier, kind of stress multiplier effect that comes with it. So I think that's very important for us to recognize is who's going to be impacted the most, and then what strategies do we put in place to support them as well. So maybe just shifting gears a little bit to what strategies and approaches. We need action at all scales. So at the individual level, Elizabeth, what you spoke to, the consumer being more informed and making more informed choices as well. But then if you look at us all as organizations, as local governments, but then it also has to complement what the state and the federal government is doing as well. So things kind of have to tie in as well. So us as at the County of Santa Clara, similar to what Palo Alto has done, we have made a commitment in our own operations to become carbon neutral by 2030. And the ways in which we do that is we've already installed about 15 megawatt of solar, and we have about 12 more megawatts of solar PV systems in the pipeline. We're also electrifying, or all our new construction, our buildings are all electric as well. We also provide a smart pass to our employees, so they can take the train or they can ride the transit as well. And in situations where the transit is not close to a work location, we've also started a shuttle recently for our hospital employees, because the Caltrain station in San Jose is farther away from one of those stations. Just like as with every other local government, we're looking to make our fleet electric as well and add these electric vehicle charging stations and all. But that we also have to do things at the community scale, because I think as a local government, we create the enabling environment for some of this work to happen. So whether it's through the policies we adopt, through incentives we offer, through regulations we put in place, we can make some of these things happen and happen faster as well. So I know Palo Alto's done this. Similar for the county, in our new construction in residential and commercial, they have to be all electric now. We all support our residences with converting their homes to all electric as well. Another one we have is a green business program, where we really work with the businesses. I know you're already doing it, but we work with the businesses on getting them green business certified and giving them ways in which they can reduce their energy use and their water use, but it's also good for their bottom line because they're seeing some savings there as well. And I think one program that impact that people don't recognize is food that is discarded and reaches a landfill actually releases a lot of methane, and methane is way more potent than carbon dioxide. So getting people to recognize that, let's not waste our food, but if we are seeing situations where food is discarded, then at the county, we are supporting a county-wide initiative on how do we recover that food so that we can actually give it to some charitable organizations, or if food is being thrown away, can it be used as compost as well?
Great.
And I think just at the individual scale, maybe what I'll add to what Elizabeth was saying is, I think it's going to need a fundamental mindset shift here. Again, thinking about, I don't have a role to play. This problem is too big for me. It's eco-paralysis is what we call it, is what can I as one person do? But I think getting people to understand that every amount of carbon emissions that we can avoid, we are headed in the right directions for that. So whether it's through individual choices they make or through market solutions, because I do think sometimes we put too much burden on the individual consumer to go find out what is the right choice to make, what is the right thing to do. This is where I think market solutions come in. We did this with plastic bags, right? Like we said, we're going to ban plastic bags as a state, and we banned them throughout. So those are just some ways in which I think we can take action.
Perfect. You've given us a lot of food for thought here, Director Sharma, so thank you so much.
Finally, Allison Brooks, the Executive Director of Bay Area Regional Collaborative, or BARC, will provide us a broad view of what the regional collaborative is doing in response to climate change.
Great, thank you so much, Jyotika. I'm going to close us out here, and folks may wonder, what is the regional? What's the regional scale that we're talking about? I work with a lot of regional agencies and state agencies that have strong regional programs, and I think we've heard a lot, both from Mayor Burt and from Jasneet about how we have counties and cities in our region, our very extremely diverse region of 101 cities, 9 counties, over 500 special districts like wastewater treatment facilities and flood management agencies, who are often, we have places in our region that are kind of the leading edge of environmental innovation. We have the Palo Altos and Berkeleys and San Franciscos that are really out in front internationally on some of the best practices around things we can do to both mitigate climate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we adapt to the changing climate already. But we also have a lot of smaller communities and places around the Bay Area that really just are struggling to just meet the basic needs that cities need to provide to their residents and businesses. And taking on some of these challenges of implementing strategies to adapt to climate change, they need a lot of support, and we need to build capacity. The phrase, we're only as strong as our weakest link. We really all need to work together to kind of lift up and build the capacity of every community around the Bay Area to be able to manage the risks we're already facing with climate change. So as regional agencies, heat, sea level rise, and flooding, they don't really pay attention to jurisdictional boundaries. We have these political boundaries that are setting these rules and policies and zoning, but we need to be thinking about these issues at a different scale. And the strategies we need to deploy need to be adjusted and adapted based on conditions that particular communities are facing. And like I said, we need to be bringing resources, lifting up the best practices from places like Palo Alto and trying to bring them to scale around the rest of the Bay Area. So that's really a role that regional agencies can help and support. And a big role I think we're thinking about is how do we collectively work together, align our strategies, and go after state and federal dollars that are going to help bring resources to the communities that are at the front lines, that really need to be deploying and implementing these strategies, and bring us all to a much safer and healthier place. So I'm going to give one example, if you don't mind bringing up. I brought up some slides because there happens to be a project right here in Palo Alto that's underway. One of the things I wanted to talk about are nature-based strategies. So we have sea level rise and flooding, heat, fire, drought, and if we think about the role that nature can play in helping, Jasneet talked about trees, and there's kind of green infrastructure that can play a role in helping to address these issues in all of our communities, and in the meantime, make them much more pleasant, cooler, more pleasant places to live. So one nature-based strategy is around ecosystem services and horizontal levees. So you have traditional levees in the slide that talk, they're more seawalls and hardscapes. And what horizontal levee, and I want to give credit to, this is San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and in particular Heidi Nutters at SFEP, who's the project manager for this work that I'm going to talk about in Palo Alto. Basically, what horizontal levees do is they take existing storm control levees and add a gradual slope with marsh planted with native vegetation, and this is connected. And the next slide, please. In the Palo Alto horizontal levee, this is connected to a wastewater treatment plant, and it basically reimagines wastewater as a resource through treating the wastewater and then putting it back out into the bay. It actually helps the rapid adoption of habitat, and it kind of is this more nature-based system to dealing with wastewater and then contributing back to natural systems. And what this does is, hardscape, like a traditional levee, when waves are coming in from the bay, or during a storm surge, it just kind of stops it, and it just sends it back, and it kind of contributes to this kind of very harsh kind of like walls that aren't really attenuating the waves. So through nature-based strategies, you can attenuate the waves and kind of manage it differently. And what we need are these all around the bay shoreline. So Palo Alto is taking the lead on this. The funding is coming from EPA, the State Coastal Conservancy, and the city. I think it's worth noting, even a high-capacity city like Palo Alto has so many things on their plate, they're really unable to move forward with project managing this. So they're partnering with SFEP, who is the lead on delivering this. You can imagine there's other communities around the Bay that really are unable to even kind of conceptualize and really get something like this going. So I think it's a good example of a regional scale agency that's partnering with the city to help implement a really innovative strategy, and then how do we take that to scale and learn from this process and adopt those throughout the rest of the Bay. So I just wanted to share that. And of course, there's other less sexy things that cities need to do, and again, what regional agencies can do is like share those best practices around zoning, building codes, how we build, where we build, the materials we're building with, are we putting people in harm's way? We need to be thinking about all of this in our land use and our strategies as a region, and lifting up those best practices and bringing money in to help accomplish those goals. And I would be remiss, and I know these, I was asked, like, what are other things we can do? I think we've covered them pretty well with this panel around all sorts of things, but I just wanted to lift up alternative modes of transportation. So transportation is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and as much as we can make the shift to electrification, but we also need to be biking and walking and taking public transit. I like this idea of slowing things down. You don't need to have that thing delivered the next day, like maybe, or maybe buy local and eat local. So those are just some examples. But I think I'll stop there because I think we've had a lot shared here tonight. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
This has been really excellent, Allison. It is definitely gratifying to see what Bay Area is doing to mitigate the effects of climate change.
To summarize, climate change is on the minds of many, and each of us can do something to reduce the dire impact.
We urge everyone to consider lifestyle changes, however small, to take steps towards a more promising and sustainable future, and to help reduce the devastation of climate change. For more information and downloadable resources from our guests here and other local organizations, please visit our website, midpenmedia.org.
As with all complex issues, we each play a role in making a positive difference in our communities, locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. We hope this segment inspires you to join the movement for change. Remember that together, we can make a difference.
Thank you, Mayor Burt, Elizabeth, Jasneet, and Allison,
Thank you.
for giving us a thorough overview of climate change. And thank you, viewers, for watching this and supporting our Make It Real series. Please tune in next time when we discuss diversity and equity. Until then, we wish you well.
Mm-hmm.